We gather for AFL 360 tonight as football folk have all day under a pall of sadness. The realisation settling over Melbourne that we were richer for the life and deeds of Jim Stynes and the poorer for his passing. His story might have been the butt of every Irish joke you'd ever heard, and some that were yet to be written. The teenage Gaelic footballer imported to play Australian rules, the game he'd never seen. The Irish experiment could have ended in his first season when he wandered through the mark of Hawk Gary Buckenara, a mistake born out of naivety. His spirit was stronger than to be crushed by such failure. Instead, he came not only to learn, but master this most foreign game. His ruck work and pure athleticism carried him to the AFL's highest individual honour, the Brownlow Medal. His skill was matched by a freakish durability. Injury couldn't cruel him. Broken bones, torn muscles, midweek surgery. He came to defy the medics and personify the Monty Python adage, "It's just a flesh wound." He was the adopted son of a city, its Indigenous game, and the oldest club that bore its name. He enriched the town through his determination to change the lives of its most vulnerable inhabitants. He redefined the code, became its most enduring player, opening its mind and removing its borders. He saved his football club for his children's children, providing it with a will and a way at its most susceptible. In his premature departure, he united Melbourne one last time, in grief and in thanks for the many blessings that was the life of Jim Stynes. Good evening tonight. In particular, it's footy from one angle. I'm Gerard Waitley. Robbo, nice to have you here.
Thank you, Gerard. What a strange day.
What a day.
Yeah, there's not much I suppose we can say now. I was thinking, what could you say, or what am I going to say when I come in? And it's funny. I feel everyone knew Jim Stynes, and it was just a matter of how much you knew him. Some knew him really, really well. Some knew him an occasional meeting, but. Geez, I think everyone was impressed by him.
The tributes have flown far and wide today, and the impact that he had not only on the game but on society in Melbourne and in Australia, as someone who as an 18-year-old came from halfway around the world. It's a remarkable story in our game.
Gary Lyon is probably as moved by anyone by the events of today. Spent hours and hours and hours sitting with Jim in hospital. And Gary didn't do it for... not for publicity, they're friends, they're best friends, you know. Gary Lyon has called this the greatest story in the history of the AFL, and it's hard to disagree.
Jim told a great story against Gary in his later days. He said that Gary had told him he didn't like many people, but he loved Jim. That wasn't a bad encapsulation, I reckon, of the power he had over people.
Very true for Gaz, but yeah, as you said, very well done on the start too.
This is a little of how the day unfolded. Jim died this morning at 8:20 and his wife made the announcement on Facebook, which was picked up. Sam Stynes, in some of these words, wrote, "In his final day, Jim was immersed with insurmountable love and tenderness, surrounded by his family and some close friends in the comfort of his own home. Jim's lesson is that life was to be challenged and treasured." And it led to the broad conversation in every aspect of Australian life as the tributes and the reality took hold.
Sam Stynes has just released this statement. Sam is Jim's wife. Jim Stynes died at 8:20 a.m. on Tuesday the 20th of March. He was pain-free, dignified and peaceful.
We just got confirmation that Jim Stynes has just died. And I think if ever a man needs a tribute from the public, it's Jim Stynes. But I've got a message from his wife, Sam. It is an incredibly sad time. However, Jim in his passing has made us see that in our grief, we can smile in our hearts for a beautiful man who will forever hold a special place.
You just assume now how much of a fighter he is, that he would be around, so you didn't think this day would ever actually come. And now that it has, obviously it's very sad.
Pretty much dedicated his life to others, and the amount of people that he's touched along the way. He's a very selfless person, and as you see, this battle that he's been going through, and he's still putting himself out there to others to try to help others, not himself, when he was the one that needed it most.
At that stage, our club needed a hero, and it was Jim Stynes. He stood up and he did whatever he had to do, as his motto, whatever it takes. Did what he had to do and rallied the troops and got the job done and got us in the position we're in today.
We don't want to just honour his memory with one game or a tribute round. We want to honour his memory by get this footy club back to where it belongs.
So he always had this other thing going on in his head where we're all just straight down the line, got to get a kick, got to take a mark, got to kick a goal, got to win a game. He was like, well, there's more to life, and he showed us all. He showed us all there was so much more to life.
Whilst most people close to Jim knew this day was inevitable, it's still very difficult to comprehend that Jim's no longer with us.
We will always remember Jim as a great footballer, a great man, a person of great courage.
Jimmy Stynes represents everything that's good about football, everything that's good about Victoria.
He saved his club. He's given it an identity going into a new millennium that it probably had lost in the late 60s. This guy has just left an indelible mark on the oldest football club in the world, having come from the other side of the world.
I think he existed to make other lives easier and to help develop people. I was involved with Reach Youth at a very early age when I first came down to Collingwood, and to see him do what he was doing with young people was fantastic, and he continued that through his whole life.
I don't mean to be perverse here, but my enduring memory of Jim Stynes was with his role with Reach. I mean, I know he was a great footballer, and I watched him play probably 100 of his 240 odd games. But the role he did with Reach and the way he just looked after disadvantaged kids is something that will stay with me forever.
If there's one thing I worry about is that we keep saying what an amazing person he was, and I worry that people don't believe it, but I'm hoping that when you hear all the stories about him, you'll understand what a privilege it has been for all of us to be so close to him.
I've always learnt from Jim, but I think the most valuable lessons have been the last few years. He never ceased to amaze me. At any point, he was incredible, and he never whinged, which is... The last month he'd bitch, but he never whinged. And he always had other people first in his mind. An incredible man that we've lost too early.
Too young at 45.
Oh, always. It's funny with all deaths, there's this great outpouring of grief, and I actually feel so much for his family and friends. It's going to sound terrible, but it's not supposed to be. He was in pain, so if he has to go, he has to go. But every funeral I go to, or every time I hear about someone's death, I always try and remember the real good times with that person. And I just want to just tell a quick story, and there's a few people in the AFL, players especially, who will know this, who have been on the Irish trips. We go to this castle in Ireland, in between the two first and second test matches in Dublin, and every time we get there, and I went there with Lyon was coach and Barry Hall was on the team. I'll ask Barry when he comes out. Jim tells a story after dinner in this 12th century castle about the history of Ireland, and he sums it up in about 20 minutes, and he had a gift. And most people have gifts in life and gifts in football. That's why coaches hate people when they're talented and they don't get the most out of their life. Jimmy was talented and got everything out of his life, and he was a great storyteller and he was a great leader. People followed Jim. Great leaders such as Gary Lyon followed Jim, and he just tells this wonderful story, and every single person who's heard that story just goes, wow, what a person. And that's 0.001% of Jim's life. So that's an enduring memory of mine.
It's a major story here. It also is in Ireland, where Australian journos have been doing interviews back to Ireland today, and this is the front page of the Irish Times. It's the main sports story there, with the GAA and the AFL linked in grief. It is worth remembering what an outstanding footballer he was. He's not a member of the Australian Hall of Fame just for his pioneering. It's because of this extraordinary record, which included a record equalling 4 best and fairests at the club, 264 games, the enduring record of 244 consecutively. the Brownlow medal, which is truly one of the great stories of the game. 4 years after he wandered through that mark of Gary Buckenara at the climax of his first season and a preliminary final.
I forgot it was his first season, to be honest. And you're right when you said he was lucky to probably stay on the list, because John Northey, the coach, would have got very, very angry because we know how premierships come around. I just didn't know it was the first year.
So a couple of memories from the past here, and you'll see this full open mic tomorrow night on Fox Footy when they sat down soon after his first session of treatment was done on the cancer, and Mike Sheehan took up the questioning.
Can you share with us how you felt when you first got the news mid-year 2009 that you had melanoma?
It was a shock. It was just like, that doesn't happen to me. It's like, that's very foreign. And then I thought, oh no, I'll be right, it'll just be a lump and I'll take it out and be, it'll be a good story, and it'll the ego kicks in and goes, well, you'll be able to say, yeah, you had cancer, but you get on with it and you beat it and all that sort of stuff. But when the doc then did the test and came back and said, no, we've got some more tumours lying around the body, then I was like, God, this is really serious. Not so much why me, I suppose part of me goes, this is ridiculous. Like, how could this be? It's not more why, because I know it's just part of nature, It's just going to happen, We're all susceptible to different things, and when you get the balance out, then things are going to happen, and illness will come your way. And, I'm not blaming anyone. Don't blame, the big fella. It's not, it's just, that's the way I see it. I don't think that some people get it because they're bad or good or anything like that. There's no payback. It's just, these things happen, and then it's how you respond to them.
So that's just a sliver of the interview that has played before and will repeat tomorrow night at 8:30 after our program on Fox Footy.
He's humble there. I was at the best night of the year, the Hall of Fame, AFL Hall of Fame. You go, I go. I was there when he was inducted. Very humbling again. And then perhaps the most moving of all speeches from Jim was at the Brownlow medal.
Well, I've got that one for you, because that, for me, it was the embrace that Ted Whitten got when he did the lap in his ailing days of the MCG with his son, and he was blind at the time, but Jim was as well as he probably was in all of this stretch for that night, and the whole community was there. So nothing got left unsaid. There are no regrets today from people. Everyone had their chance to say what Jim Stynes had meant to football, and I do feel like this was sort of the climax of all of that.
We were formally informed that you'd been given 9 months to live 14 months ago. Your wife, Sam, said that it's inevitable to her that this will get you in the end. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, look, we had a bit of a chat about that, and that's more Sam in her, those dark moments where she, because we all have fears, like I've had the fear as well, like, will I make it or not? But we both know that we're going to get there, and but it is it's a that demon in the head can cause all sorts of issues for people, and I know for me, I've had to work hard to maintain a really positive attitude, and I know when people ask me how I'm going, and I'll just let you all know, I'm going really well, thank you. You don't have to ask me anymore. But it's just, I just I've had an experience that's, in some ways, I've been very blessed because I've had an insight into life that not many people get. And I know a lot of people do, and they've gone through all sorts of terminal illnesses. But when you're faced with that prospect, it does make you sit back, stop, and go, okay, what's really important now? Is football as important? Is business as important? Is and you go through all the things that you did put in the top of your priority list, and you realise, as I've said it in the doco, that my family, my kids and my wife Sam, they are everything to me, and it's not just enough to say it. you've got to live it, you know, and you've got to demonstrate it. And you know, I used to be a bit of a junkie when it came to being busy and doing things and being ambitious and all that sort of stuff. And I still have a little bit of that. Like, I'm never going to lose it because it keeps you going and it gives you other purposes in life. But you know, but the experience I've had over the last 14 months, I wouldn't change it any other way. I think it's something that, you know, will hold me good stead, and it's made me, as I said, a much better person.
So have you got any advice for those of us who are floundering around with our lives? Have you wondered whether you could have absorbed the lessons without having to absorb them such a hard way?
Yeah, now look, I suppose the one thing I'm lucky is I never know what's going to happen next week, because the type of cancer I've got, you know, it wasn't just the one tumour and I'm fighting that. It's, you know, I've already got rid of 16 and I've got another 4 to go, and, you know, it just keeps turning in all sorts of different ways. And, you know, I've had all sorts of different therapies and weird therapies, as you know, and I don't recommend that you use it tonight. But it is, you know, you just do, and I've always had a mantra, you know, and it was, you know, I used it in a book that I wrote back in the 90s. You just do whatever it takes, and if it's sport or if it's relationships or if it's getting sick, you just do whatever it takes to get well. And that's really been my mantra, and I just go after it, and I go after looking for good people and people who've got, you know, good histories, and that's what I'm looking for.
And the embrace at the end of all of that, in a spontaneous round of applause, that was how Footy felt toward Jim Stynes. It was the Brownlow medal count a couple of years ago. With us on AFL 360 tonight is a teammate, a friend, a colleague, Chris Connolly. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Mark. It's been a very sad day at the club, and everyone's fighting their way through it. All the past players are together down in St Kilda, and, you know, we've had plenty of ups and downs, but you know, it's a great story that needs to be told.
People were well prepared for it. It's one of those hard ones. Was there any measure of relief in it for him that the pain of 3 years had ended?
No, look, my personal opinion is he's going to fight till the end, and you know, he said he loved living. Sam's a real hero. You know, she's been through the mill. He's had a lot of great support. He's got a wonderful family. It's been extraordinarily tough on them, but Jimmy was going to fight and have every second of life he could muster. There's no question.
When the news was announced this morning, how quickly did it spread through the Melbourne Football Club community past players?
Like wildfire.
Was it really?
And that's what technology does now. You know, everyone had an inkling. Jimmy has a house down the peninsula near my house, and I was on a walk and the flag was at half-mast, and, you know, you're always, you know, thinking for the worst, and, you know, everyone had the back of their mind, but he was such a fighter, and he'd been written off so many times, and he'd fought back. In the end, we just thought he was going to live forever, and he was at the commencement dinner last week and conducted himself remarkably, and, you know, he's just a leader from start to finish.
His connection to the community broadly throughout Australia, and we'll show you some tweets here from our viewers who have sent in their tributes throughout the day. He was a man from half a world away who's ended up coming to personify the oldest football club in this country, the club of Smith and Barassi and Flower and Neitz, and yet it's Stynes who has brought it all together. It's quite remarkable.
It is. It's an incredible story, the greatest story in the game. And for my personal opinion, it was very courageous of Jimmy to put himself out there. And he put himself out there because he wanted to inspire people, whether it was engagement in Reach or the Melbourne Footy Club or whatever the case may be, anything he took on. And that's courageous, because a lot of people would rather live their life in private because you're exposing yourself. And I think that he saw so many people being inspired by him, it just kind of snowballed into him wanting to do more and more. And he never thought Reach had become what it's become. And it's going to go from strength to strength. And then, of course, Jimmy, when he came over in 1986, he couldn't kick the football. Rod McNabb and Ray Jordan took him to the club rooms. There was an ex-player and great mate of mine, Adrian Batterson, at the club, and Slug said, look, take Jimmy over to the park at the MCG and have a kick. Now, they're standing 15 metres apart and he couldn't kick the ball properly. And I always joked that he used to, at training, would have him kick with Sean White because he couldn't kick either, and they both ended up all Australian. So we must have had great coaches. But, you spoke about Gary, Robbo, before the show started. I mean, Gary loves Jimmy because he felt Jimmy was one of the best kicks to him on the league. Because what happened with Jimmy, Ray Slug Jordan had this technique to put the hand under the ball. And as he got more comfortable on his preferred side, it moved around to the ball. But you'd always see him on his non-preferred side with the hand under the ball. And he knew he could only kick the ball over 25 metres. So he never tried to work outside that range, but he'd put the ball up, and guys like Gary would run in and take a soft ball. He loved catching the ball. It wasn't going over his head. He knew it. So Gary loved him because he made him look good.
Gary, just on Gary, I don't want to keep going back to Gary because there's a lot of people who move, but Gary, of everyone at the football club, is it safe to say he's probably the closest to Jim?
Certainly one of.
One of.
And certainly a lot closer to myself than Jim. But Gary's seen as a grumpy person, as you'd well know, if things aren't working out. But he's a private person too, Gary.
This changed him. Jim changed Gary in some way.
Well, I think people of Gary and Jimmy's age, they don't have many people die that they're close to. So this might be the first time for Gary and first time for a lot of people. And... that's as heavy a tilt. And as you said during the show, I mean, it's such a young age. And the thing about Jimmy too, like in 86, he was told he was no good. And he was too ashamed to go back to Ireland. That's my take. So he went to Paran, played well, come back in 87, won the club champion in the reserves, made his way into the finals team. By 91 had won the club champion, didn't win another club champion until 95, 96, 97, played 244 games in a row. The guy you got to get on here is Andrew Daff, our doctor of 20 years, and say, Andrew, tell us some of the injuries. Just put a whole show on it. I mean, this guy, the injuries Jimmy played with were as remarkable as anything he's ever done in his life. And there's a million stories,
What Jared, just echoing Jared's comments at the start of the show, affecting all of Australia, a lot of Jim's work was away from the public. And just like his football, because there was no cameras of training all the time back then, and it wasn't the media and the technology around then. Tell us somehow, how hard did Jim work, get himself from a guy who can't hit a ball from 15 metres to winning the club best and fairest in 91?
Yeah, look, he was born with a gift too. Now, he could run like Forrest Gump. So if your kids are growing up and they hear the legend of Jim Stynes, you've got to show them the movie. He could run like Forrest Gump. The only guy who could match him on our runs was our great Melbourne supporter, Steve Monaghetti. He's the only one who could beat him up Creswick Hills and all the hills we used to run under John Northey. But every night, it was just the basic skills, kick the ball as hard into me as you can.
Hours and
hours. And the other thing with Jimmy, there's a lot of great ruckmen at the time that he competed against, and he was undersized physically. And, that took a lot of courage too, and that kind of manifested his injuries too. So it was a great, courageous effort. He played to his strengths. He ended up a link out of defence. Some people criticised Jimmy when he played because ruckman was seen as the big guys that sat behind the ball, but he'd link the ball up through the midfield.
He was the first Dean Cox.
But you could always back him in to deliver. He was always going to deliver.
He took on the presidency for the purest reason I think that a football fan can have is he wanted one day his son to be able to go to the MCG with his son and barrack for the Mighty D's. And probably in his only moment of public resentment toward his illness was that he knew he wouldn't live to join his son and his grandson at the footy. The desire to save his footy club was very close to his heart.
Absolutely. And look, the story there is that the people who'd been at the Melbourne Football Club had held it together. The revenue streams through stadium arrangements and a lot of kind of weights around our club. And that held the club together. But we needed someone to pull people back together to save the club because we were $5 million in debt. Now, Jimmy didn't want to do it. He'd just started his childcare business with Pelican. He had a young family. He was taking reach from strength to strength. I mean, the last thing he wants to do is take a club that has hit the wall a couple of times over the last 30 years and try and, take on a $5 million debt. And he knew his weakness. He knew he wasn't a great businessman. And it all happened at the Hilton. And he was convinced to take it on. And from that, as soon as he made that decision, he charged over the hill with great support from the board at the time. And then the board at that time also got on board. And in the end, and we had one dinner one night. We raised $2 million. We've wiped the debt of $5 million, and we have this group of foundation heroes that have become the backbone of the club, and they're all set up by Jim, and the inspiration he gave everyone around the club to unify.
Remember the night? I'm pretty sure he was here. The night the club took Tom Scully and Jack Trengove and went back to the MCG, and it's only about 100 people there. Remember that night?
Yeah, I do.
Was Jim there? I can't remember if Jim there was or not, because
it was in the Trumbull room.
Yeah, that was the night, the starting of the wiping out the debt, and these two young stars had just arrived at the club, and there was this air of we're happening. This club is reborn again, and it was just part of this feel-good time where Jim was getting involved, I reckon, and the club was moving again.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of energy around the club, and the clubs are very special to people in different ways, but Jim owes the club a lot. That's what he always used to say, and he'd do anything for the club, and he's proven that, and it's been an incredible story. And then to be thrown this curveball of cancer, just the way that affected everyone around the club, I mean, it's just been an incredible situation, to see, and the stories I could tell you, where he's checked himself out of hospital, where he's... I sat at dinner once, we had a Peter Zentel, who passed away from cancer, a great director, and the first board dinner we had was at Peter's place, and Jimmy checked himself out of hospital. He had a tube coming out of his abdomen into a jar. It was like something out of the Munsters, but nothing was going to stop him, He took a turn on the Saturday in my office. He felt really ill before a Collingwood game. I spoke to the staff and players that he'd taken this turn, and it was when we came a draw with Collingwood, and I look up and he's in the rooms after the game. He checked himself out.
Vomiting in the MCG car park.
Then he'd go back to hospital. And, he was an inspiration.
And his legacy to remove borders. I like the words of Nick Natanui during the day. He said, Jimmy Stynes, if it wasn't for you, blokes like myself from a different background wouldn't be in the AFL. So his legacy is well assured. Chris, we appreciate you coming in and sharing some memories with us, and go and join those past players.
Have some beers.
Close to him.
Yeah, and look, I just love everyone to read the stories. It's the greatest one in the game.
And you'll like this. This was David Schwartz, a former teammate of his during the day. I guess coming to terms with the grief that Melbourne has been dealt in recent times.
I was thinking this morning, you'd be up there with Sean White right now, and Sean be having a cup of tea because he didn't drink, and Jimmy be having a Guinness, and St. Paddy's Day 3 days ago, and two great mates that came across. It's so sad that we've had to bury two of our really unbelievable stories in the last 2 years. It's sometimes life isn't fair, and I think today's one of those days that we can say that life sucks sometimes, and I'm just glad that we've met Jimmy Stynes and that he's been a part of our game.
It's football's loss. It's acutely the Melbourne Football Club's loss at this time. So a man who has embedded himself in the history of Australia's game, Jim Stynes.